I'm Celine Parren Shimizu, director of the film The Celine Archive. I'm also the director of the School of Cinema at San Francisco State University. The Celine Archive is a feature film 10 years in the making. It essentially brings to life the story of Celine Navarro, who was a Filipino-American immigrant woman buried alive by her community in 1932, Northern California.
That blows my mind. I mean, buried alive. I mean, how did you discover the story? And, what was it like living with her? Because you literally have been living with her, in my opinion, her spirit and her story. So how did you discover it? And how did you think, okay, we got to put this on film. We got to let the world know. And what was it like?
I discovered her story through the archives at the Bancroft Library when I was an undergraduate at Cal. Like many undergraduates from underrepresented communities, we really used our education to find out about our history. And Filipino Americans have been part of this country for hundreds of years, and especially in California. And her story made me see the Bay Area in a new way. Filipinos are the largest Asian American group in Northern California. And it was so shocking to me that we know so little about Filipinos as a whole, but especially about women when you studied Filipino American history. As you can tell, her first name is just like my name. And well, beyond that, I think, just what she went through as a person living in a really segregated community, like Filipinos, were low-wage workers doing primarily stoop labor. There were 14 men to one woman. And, there were race riots. Filipino men were known for being really gallant and dashing and presenting a kind of sexual threat to white women, but they were worth taking the risk for women to cross not only the anti-miscegenation lines, color lines, but also state lines. They wanted to get married to Filipino men. And, the story of Filipino America has been really dominated by men. And so when her name came up in the archive, it was shocking because it kind of told this salacious story. Like, was this Filipina woman surrounded by all of these young men making a choice, exercising her own sexual freedom, and was then punished for it by being accused of adultery, abandoning her sick husband to get together with someone else, being a thief. And so I thought, wow, this woman had so much agency and acted beyond what we thought women could do at the time. She wasn't a passive person. She really acted in order to change her life.
Right.
But the more I found out in the archive, it was really a story of gendered violence and brutality. Filipino American historians and scholars found out that she testified against a man who was a known domestic abuser in the community. And when she spoke up against the community that really valued loyalty, they became disloyal to her and physically and psychically punished and tortured her. And so I lived with her in the sense that I really wanted her story to be known. I want, as part of a larger impulse to make the stories of women known, like they experienced racism, but they also experienced sexism within their communities. And it made me realize we have this huge capacity to suppress the stories of women. And we have this huge capacity to silence the violence against women that happens within communities of color because they were such victims of racism. So yeah, she really haunted me. And I thought for a while, she's a ghost that's haunting me. So this movie's going to look like a ghost story. But in the making of it, she became more and more a real woman, and I thought it would ultimately diminish her if I told her like she was a ghost. She was a mother, she was a daughter, and a really beloved person in the community. So I wanted to honor her and her family.
So you have this archive there at the school. What other archives did you use is part of her life living in other parts of California's, library system or archival system, or?
Yeah, not her. The story of Celine Navarro and the story of Filipino America lives not only in the Bancroft Library at UC Berkeley, but also the Smithsonian, the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., the Bank of Stockton archives. I didn't know that they had an archive until I was really digging into things. And I think the most useful archive is really the Filipino American National Historical Society, which has a museum in Stockton, as well as its main office in the Seattle area. And this is really a testimony to how, Filipinos knew that they were being made invisible in American history. I mean, they felt like they were a part of America, but their stories weren't being told. So they took it upon themselves to say, let's collect our stuff. Let's collect our letters. Let's collect our outfits. Let's put it in boxes. Let's send it to this museum. Let's raise money to say we were here. So you can see both, the nationally regarded museums, public higher education, as well as communities rising up to tell their history. There was one person in particular who was so fascinating, and he was an economics student named James Earl Wood at UC Berkeley, and he was so fascinated by Filipinos in the late 1920s through the 30s.
Wow.
And he took it upon himself to just interview so many people, like Filipinos on the train, Filipinos in hotels and restaurants, workers, farmers. He just took it upon himself to do that all over California, because I think he looked around in his life and he said, I'm noticing these people are here. There's about 30 to 40,000 of them. Let me get at their story. So if this were ever to become a Hollywood movie and Hollywood wanted a white man to be a center of the story, they would make him that guy, But I really am hoping that, to find the resources myself to be able to dramatize, what these communities went through. Almost like a Filipino La Bamba, in terms of, the dramatic and inventive life that these people led, living in makeshift homes, like you would think like if they were farm workers, the farming industry would provide them homes. No, they actually had to build their own barracks, and these very same barracks were the sites of a lot of racial violence. Like in Watsonville in 1930, there were a mob of 500 white men torturing, burning, shooting at these barracks, that these Filipinos made. So I mean, it's just so visually and cinematically dramatic that I hope that this film becomes an invitation, to create representations of this time in American history.
I really hope so too. I really hope so too, because
Yeah.
I learned a lot. I love history and I love cultural history. And I just learned so much. I mean, I could watch your film for another 2 hours because there's just so much information that I did not know. And now I have a better appreciation for Filipinos. I'm in Texas and there's a lot of Filipinos here. And now I have a better appreciation for who they are and how they contributed to our history. How did this film change you? How did you grow as a person? I mean, what did you learn? How did you how did this film affect you personally and professionally?
Dev, as you know, having watched the film, I'm a part of the film, and I actually did not realize that I was going to be a part of the film until the very last minute, until we really had a cut.
Right.
And I realized that my own story of grief and loss is what motivated this almost decade-long research and digging into her story. My youngest son, Lacoste, died suddenly of a common virus that attacked his heart within 24 hours. So it's a devastating loss, and it made me very compassionate and empathetic towards the loss that her family endured. And I became really sensitive to that and really prioritized their experience. And I think the thing that I learned the most from Celine Navarro, especially today on Mother's Day, which is the day that we're speaking, is that we have a responsibility to mother children in our community. She really did that even as she was dying, to make sure that her children were okay. She was known in the community as a very caring person, and her spirit, as her family says, wishes to be told in order to pass on that story of our responsibility to each other and each other's children.
We are speaking on Mother's Day. It's May 9th, 2021. And if you don't mind, tell me a little bit about your son. Let's honor him, since this is kind of part of your journey. What was he like? I mean, what was he as a young child? I mean,
so my youngest son, Lacoste, was 8 years old when he died, and he was the most loving, kind, and compassionate kid. He had the biggest hugs. He was known for, in our family for giving the biggest hugs. And he was also known in his classroom for being really inclusive and wanting to treat everyone equitably. And he made kindness really fun. And he was not one to make people feel bad, but to really inspire them to just really enjoy life together. You know, he was interviewed on Thanksgiving and he said, "What do you value most on Thanksgiving?" And he said, "I value being alive." And I think that really, you know, captured his spirit. And after he died, so many young kids, you know, came up to me and told me so many stories about, you know, how he included them. You know, a young girl told me that when she went to the bathroom during group work, she came back and the boy said, "You lost your turn because you went to the bathroom." And he just did not let that happen. You know, he says, "That's totally unfair. She gets her turn right now." And all the boys were like, "Okay, good idea." You know, we shouldn't do that. So, you know, I think when a child dies, you don't realize how much you need them, you know, especially as a parent when you're providing care for them. I think that's definitely what I learned, is that I really needed him, you know.
And may his memory always be a blessing to you and your family.
Thank you, Dev.
What, what has the reaction been with the Filipino community? Because this is, I'm a big Asian history buff. I've never heard of this story. So what has been the reaction of the Filipino and Asian community as you're going down this journey and, making this documentary, and now it's a finished product, it's in film festivals and
Yes, and won several awards at film festivals. So, you know, for me, the Filipino American community is one that I really wanted to bring together. You can see from the telling of the story, not only did I involve her family's testimony, and I also involved, you know, members of the fraternal organization who were indicted, you know, for killing her. But I also really wanted to involve community historians as well as, you know, scholars in the academy who had been living with her story, much like I had, in order to collectively reckon, you know, with that history. And the response has been overwhelmingly positive. I think that we really benefit from this era of the post Me Too and Time's Up movement, where we really are contending with the silences that have haunted our communities. And, you know, her family, of course, has adopted me into their family, which is really the greatest honor as a scholar and ethnographer who walks into communities and listens to them. To be embraced and enveloped by their love and warmth is something that I take very seriously. And I think they recognized that in me, that I wasn't going to tell a salacious story. I wasn't going to follow like a forensic files, Law and Order kind of vein of telling the story. I really wanted to focus on intergenerational trauma. And it makes our community ask the question of what other stories are out there, you know, that really need to be told.
lastly, what is the website of the film and how can we support you and this wonderful journey you've been? It's award-winning film. It's a really good documentary. So what is the website and how can we follow you?
The Celine Archive's website is celinearchive.com. It's also now distributed by the premier distributor of women's films in the US, if not the world, Women Make Movies, WMM.com. It's screening at the Harlem International Film Festival virtually for another week through May 16th. And it's going to do a second theatrical screening. Actually, it'll be live in a big tent in Cortland, New York, upstate New York, as part of the Blackbird International Film Festival. So that's what's next. It'll be up for educational and, you know, community individual distribution through Women Make Movies. So you can email them at orders@wmm.com.
That's excellent. Congratulations on such a great film and happy Mother's Day.
Thank you so much, Dev. I really appreciate your recognition of the film.